Good evening and welcome to our special tasting event coming to you live tonight from Glengoyne Distillery. My name's Stephen Jardine. It's my pleasure to be your host for the next 60 minutes for a very special whisky evening. We're coming to you from about 15 miles north of Glasgow in the beautiful Trossachs of Scotland, quite close to Loch Lomond. And over the course of the next 60 minutes, we're going to share with you some of the secrets of Glengoyne. Right now, I'm in the duty-free warehouse, which is one of the oldest parts of the distillery. It dates back to 1833, and I'm surrounded here by some of the oldest casks that we have here at Glengoyne. Down there from 1972, first fill sherry casks, 1984 there, 1985 as well. These are some of the most valuable casks here at the distillery. But our event tonight is actually coming to you from warehouse number 1, which lies at the very heart of the distillery. What we're doing over the course of the next 60 minutes is sharing with you 3 different expressions of Glengoyne, and we'll be tasting those with a specially invited audience and with you direct on the internet around the world as well. Before we meet the men in charge who are going to take us through proceedings here tonight, I want to tell you about the competition that we're running, which lets you be part of this whole thing here as well. You can have your chance to win your favourite expression of Glengoyne from tonight's tasting simply by taking part and voting on our website, glengoyne.com, for your favourite, or you can take part as well via Facebook just by hitting the button on our Facebook live stream as well. We've opened voting for that now, and it will stay open until 12 noon on Monday the 28th. Now, with us here this evening, it's not just us. We have a specially invited audience who are with us in warehouse number 1 as well, here to join in the tasting. We have 12 competition winners and 6 local whisky bloggers as well. Good evening to you all. Thanks for being here this evening. We have 2 of our competition winners from Germany. Where are you? Hands up. Guten Tag. Good evening. Thank you for being here. We have 2 from Sweden. Where are you? The good-looking ones at the back there. I might have known it. The rest from all over the UK as well. Welcome to you all. Thanks for being with us here this evening. It's time now to meet the 2 men in charge here this evening who will take you through this tasting. They are the men who make sure that every single day the Glengoyne whisky that comes from here is of the same immaculate quality. And a little bit like the way whisky is best served up with a little bit of water, these 2 perform best together as well. So please welcome here this evening Distillery Manager Robbie Hughes and Group Brand Home Manager Stuart Hendry. Here they come. Welcome.
Thank you.
Here you are.
Thank you.
It's busy tonight.
It's busy. Thank you, studio audience and whisky lovers around the world for joining us tonight. We hope it's going to be a special evening, and Robbie and I are looking forward to it, I think.
Yeah, very much so, yes.
Set this up for us, Robbie. For you, what makes Glengoyne special? What makes it different?
I've worked at quite a few distilleries before I came to Glengoyne. I had an idea what I was letting myself in for, but I just didn't expect the amount of passion that is at the distillery, the history of it. I mean, we've been doing this now since 1833. There's been fewer than 10 distillery managers working here in almost 200 years. And each one of those managers has had a dedicated and passionate team. So what happens is it goes from decade to decade, generation to generation, the recipe goes down and it doesn't change to the point we are now where we've been doing it for almost 200 years, where the passion is still there, the recipe is still the same. But the way we produce it, Stephen, is different from any other distillery I've worked at. It's the attention to detail that we do. We do things which are so laboriously slow. When I was a new distillery manager, it was actually annoyingly slow because I've always been used to getting the maximum out of the distillery.
Efficiencies.
Efficiencies.
Like to talk about that, don't they?
Yeah. We're very inefficient and we're very slow. You know, which is how your mum and dad would describe you, probably. You know. But that's what we go for. That's the quality here at Glengoyne. You could build a distillery 25% smaller than Glengoyne, and you would still produce the same amount of whisky that we produce. We've got that spare capacity, not to produce whisky, it's to produce the whisky of that certain quality, of that certain flavours. So when Stuart describes these bottles, that first one, the very top one to the left, that is the spirit that we make now, the new make spirit. If every one of them are exactly the same as we've produced for the last almost 200 years, then what you'll get eventually into these bottles will be the same. If we change the quality at any one aspect of it, then things will change and these will change. So it's all about reproduction, and Glengoyne is passionate about that. It's got the slow distillation, and that's really the bottleneck, just to maximize the flavors, to get these fruity flavors coming through that nobody else gets in any other Scotch whisky distillery. So it's about the passion, but it's about the actual attention that the operators give to producing the whiskey year in and year out.
Right, so Robbie says it's time and it's care. Stuart, what else for you?
Well, for me, it's a two-stage process. So everything Robbie has described is exactly as it is. It's about slow distillation. It's about building up the fruitiness through the distillation. And crucially, it's about every drop of new make that we produce here being exactly the same day after day after day. But then the story changes because we fill it into several different types of casks that we're going to explain in some detail as we go through the tasting. And each one of these casks will fill a few thousand a year, Robbie. And every one of these casks, if you go back to them in 10 or 20 or 30 years' time, will be slightly different. Some markedly different because it's a different oak species. Some different because it's a different first fill of sherry or bourbon beforehand. But even your sherry casks that should all turn out exactly the same wander down slightly different roads. And so, although we start on day one of maturation with exactly the same flavour and exactly the same colour and exactly the same smell, we go back a decade or two later and we have thousands of different flavours and thousands of different smells. And we employ a very clever guy who's a bit more clever than we are, Robbie. John Glass, if you're watching, well done. And John's job is to then combine all these different flavours together, time after time after time, to get consistency in the 15-year-old or in the 18-year-old or in the 21-year-old. And for me, these two sides of the story, one can't exist without the other. And I think we're lucky enough to work at a distillery that does both sides of that equation really, really well. And we hope that's going to come across in the spirit that we're all trying tonight.
Enough of that. Who'd like to drink some whiskey? Yeah. Right, let's go on with it. Guys, over to you.
To start? Well, we're going to start. We've got 3 whiskies tonight. We've got a much larger range in this, but tonight, for time reasons and because some of you look like you don't need much more whiskey out there in the audience, we're going to concentrate on 3. We're going to start with 15. We're going to move into an 18-year-old, and we're going to finish with a 21-year-old. And you'll find as we go on that the cask story changes in terms of the recipe for each of these as we go. Now, the 15 is not the youngest whiskey that we produce. We have a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old. Sorry, a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, and also a cask strength. All 3 of those are younger than 15. So this is sort of halfway down our core range, if you like.
This is really where we start going into the deluxe products. You know, the younger ones are what we would normally call the session whiskies, which is fair enough. Where these you're getting a wee bit more body. You know, you spent 15 years in very expensive casks, so you're going to have more flavors coming through. But the 15-year-old, which we'll discuss in a minute, is different. There's 3 different types of wood.
There is.
With a 15-year-old, and one of them is actually a bourbon, and that's quite rare and new to Glengoyne. We never really did much with bourbon in the past. It's always been about other whiskies, mainly about the sherry.
It would be 6 or 7 years ago we started?
Roughly 15, yeah, 6 or 7 years. We've also got a 12-year-old, which is a similar profile, but the 15-year-old's just got more body and more depth than the 12-year-old, and that's why we thought we'd try that one tonight.
Yeah, so 15, we've got a mix of first fill bourbon casks. Roughly just under 1/3 of the bottle comes from the first fill of an ex-bourbon cask. We've got a little bit more, about 20% or so of the first fill from a sherry cask, and the rest of the bottle, the sort of top half, if you like, are refill casks. And refill casks, you can see in these handy displays behind us, which show all the colours involved. Refill casks can start off as either sherry casks or indeed as bourbon casks. To us, it just means that they have been filled at least once before with Glengoyne. And the refill casks they're often overlooked, but some of the refill casks that we try are subtly brilliant and are fantastic whiskies. But we talked about John earlier and John creating our whiskies. Refill casks allow him to just sometimes tone down some of the flavours from the sherry and from the bourbon, to add a great bit of body. There's usually a little bit of sweetness there. And so refill casks are really, really important to any distillery. It's not always just about first fill.
Another thing that's worth admitting, we're also cask owners, and the cask we have in the warehouse is a refill cask. That's right, yeah. You know, we could have gone for a bourbon or any other range, but we just thought a refill cask Glengoyne was actually something that we'd like to try.
And in terms of the distillery character that we talked about earlier, in some ways that's the purest, because you're still tasting an awful lot of the fresh fruitiness and the lovely sort of rich estery flavours that your guys create, and the smell that you get when you walk in the stillhouse every morning.
That's right. So I'd said the least influence.
So great whiskey from refill casks, but we'll probably concentrate more on the bourbon casks, because with the three we have today, the only one with any bourbon casks in it is our 15-year-old. And we get these in obviously from the US. You probably fill 1,000 or so.
Yeah, bourbon barrels just around about 1,000.
And what would it cost you to buy in a bourbon barrel, Robbie?
A bourbon barrel now, probably imported is around just under $100 to get one of the barrels across from America. Back in 2004, we were paying about $15 to get the same barrels from America. So over the last 10, 12 years, the demand for these barrels is just gone right up. And with the demand, so is the cost. But it's part of what we do. If we didn't spend all the money on these expensive casks and just concentrate on the cheaper ones, well, then we wouldn't produce these whiskies. It's the same way with the production itself. If you're going to produce an expensive quality product, you don't want to put it into the cheapest casks you can possibly buy. You want to make sure you can get the best possible casks you can buy, and that's, in this case for the 15, is the bourbon and also the sherry with 50% of the refill. Do you know we haven't drunk it yet?
We haven't, no.
We haven't drinking it yet.
I think we should do that now.
I think we should have a wee taste. They're all looking and they're getting angry looking at the back.
Yeah.
He's looking at his watch.
So with tasting, it's the same as tasting any spirit or indeed any wine. You're going to use three senses. We're going to look at this spirit first, and by doing so, we can maybe learn a couple of things. And first thing you're looking at is colour. And the important thing to tell you and everyone else out there around the world is that at Glengoyne we add no artificial colour in any of our whiskies. Everything is just naturally coming from the cask. And so then, just to see that in action here, this display with the bourbon cask, this is Robbie's new make spirit.
Yeah.
This is it after 1 year in the cask. And you're seeing some colour coming in, and you're also seeing a bit of evaporation coming in. Each year you'll lose a certain amount, and that evaporation rate will be highest in the first year, Robbie. Mm-hmm. Would it be 3 or 4%?
In a barrel, it'll be quite high, it'll be almost 3%.
Okay. And then that settles down a little bit, and you go down to...
Roughly in a barrel, you're looking about 1.5 to 2% per year.
So you'll see as we go through 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, down through to 19, and down here to this one would be 29 years old, you'll see the level dropping in these bottles. And this has actually been quite scientifically done. It's not just some cold tea we found lying around. This is exact average samples, if you like. So every cask different. But on average, when we get down to this 29-year-old, that would be the colour you'd expect from a bourbon barrel, and that would be the rate of evaporation you'd expect. So your stock's dwindling all the time as the angels are floating up there in the sky, sort of drinking it in as it evaporates. So we've got the first thing to look at is colour, and the colour is going to give you some idea about how old the cask is. And this has got a lovely bright golden colour, Robbie. It looks great, it shines nicely, it looks good in the glass. And the next thing we're going to do, having looked at it, is see how it reacts to the glass. How full bodied is this whiskey? How viscous is it? How alcoholic is it? And we can tell that just by, sometimes best in a flat surface, just moving it round, asking the whiskey to climb up the glass. If it comes over the top, you've gone a bit far. Try not to do that. And then we're going to pick the glass up, hold it up into the light, and see if we can see a little line, the highest point it's reached. And what we're going to try and analyse is how long does it take to run down the glass? How quick are the tears, or as we more commonly call them, the legs coming down? So this is sticking to the glass fairly well, and that will change as we go through and try again with 18 and 21-year-old. By the time it's a 21-year-old, the bloody thing refuses to come down the glass, to be honest, and that tells its own story. So now I'm thinking, I know there's no artificial colour, I know roughly the mix of the casks in here, so now I can start to think roughly how old it is, and I can also look at how much it sticks to the glass. And the thing to remember is, because you're going to coat your whole mouth with whiskey, in a simple way, the longer it clings to that glass, the longer it takes to fall back down the glass, the more it's going to stick to your teeth and your tongue and last in your mouth, and the sort of richer and oilier it is. That's the first thing we're going to do. We're then going to sugar it around again, and this time put our nose in it and inhale as deeply as we can. And if you just do that now, I like to ask people to do it with their mouth hanging open. It has no bearing on the process, but I quite enjoy looking at people when they're doing that. But what we are going to do is just start to think, what are we getting in there?
First thing I get from that is I get lemons. Thing of lemons, because that's coming from the bourbon influence, from these casks here. It's zesty coming through. I also get creamy notes as well. Again, that's part of the new make character. We're looking for this creamy notes coming through, so there's definitely lemons. You guys picking up lemons? Thank goodness for that. Do you get lemons? We're all getting lemons. There's one of you 5 a day. So if you have 5 of these a day, you're just ticking every box, aren't you? Yeah.
And a bit of there's a sweetness in there which is like a toffee or a.
Which again is typical, indicative of Glengoyne. There's this sweetness coming through.
Maybe a little bit of.
Shout out if you're getting anything, you know. Gooseberries. Yep, absolutely.
Gooseberries.
It's which comes from your green fruit. Gooseberries it's that fresh, and again that's coming from between the new make and the influence of the bourbon side. And because this doesn't have as much of the sherry influence that we'll get later on, it's subdued.
Yeah.
It is tangy. Absolutely, it's tangy. It's very Moorish. You know, it is. It's Moorish, and we wouldn't class it as a session whiskey. We didn't last Friday night. We were at the Glengoyne party, did we? It definitely wasn't a session whiskey, but it's there. It's the kind of whiskey you can keep going back to because it's lovely and it keeps revealing different flavors. But the first initial shot to me is always lemons, and I always associate that with this whiskey, the bourbon.
For me, Robbie, I think there's a really, really good balance here. Of all the whiskies in our range, this is halfway between the stills and the cask. I can taste the aromas that I smell when I'm walking into your distillery. Yeah. I can get the cask influence. There's a richness and a spiciness that the sherry cask is going to bring, but that's really nicely balanced with that fresh fruitiness and that zestiness. And I think for me, balance is the word that I would use to describe that. It's just perfectly sitting in that glass.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So, you're saying John's done a good job again?
I think John has. Well done, John.
Well done, John. Yeah. What do you think of that one? It's good, isn't it? It's a really good whiskey. And as Stuart was saying, it's new. It's only, well, we say new, it's 6 years. In the life since 1833, that is young and new to us. And it is a very popular product. You know? And it's just one of these whiskies, when you've had a really hard day or a hard week, that just ticks the box every time.
Yep. Great whiskey.
It is a great whiskey, yeah.
So I think we'll say, ladies and gentlemen, we give you the Glengoyne 15-year-old. Cheers to that. And we're going to put that glass down. Finish it if you want, Robbie. I know you well enough. And we're going to now pick up a Glengoyne 18-year-old. And we were famously in the past. We produced a Glengoyne 17-year-old. So when going back a few years, we had 3 in our range. We had 10-year-old. We had a big jump up to 17-year-old, and then we had a 21-year-old. And we wanted to bring out a 12-year-old. And when we tried the 15-year-old concoction, as it was suggested at first, we thought, we've got to do that, that's great. We then wanted to do an 18-year-old and a 21-year-old. And at that point, we retired the 17-year-old and we brought in the 18-year-old. It's a very, very similar recipe, but with an extra year in the cask and more richness and spiciness. And this one here is, the bourbon's gone now. There'll be no more bourbon casks in the other 2 whiskies we're going to taste. This one is a mixture of exactly half the bottle is from first fill sherry, and the other half of the bottle is refill casks. And this is a whiskey which has a more unusual strain of sherry cask in terms of whiskey producers using it, and that is what we call an American oak sherry cask. So although they've got wonderful oak trees in Spain that grow up in the north, around about Galicia and Asturias and Cantabria and places like that, much better growing conditions than they have down in Jerez. And although we love the European oak sherry casks, the Spanish sherry producers don't mature their sherry in the local casks. You get too rich and too bold a flavour, and you'll see some of the flavours and some of the richness, and even visually at this stage with the European oak casks. These American oak casks are still bringing us some of these fresh fruity flavours that Robbie described. They're bringing us some richness and some spiciness, but not to the same extent as a European oak cask. So this is, if you go to a sherry bodega, you will see sherry casks made of American oak and not European oak. And because of that, they're harder for us to get our hands on effectively, because a sherry bodega, sherry Solera stays in place for 50 or 100 years.
Oh, and longer.
And the casks are never empty. The sherry is they call it refractional blending. They pour in the very top cask the new wine each year, and from the bottom cask they take out.
They can't take out more than a third.
Just under a third, I think. And that creates a gap to then fill it from the next level up and from the next level up. And it's literally like when Robbie was young, and Robbie's from a part of the world where frankly petrol was still rationed in the 1970s, and therefore Robbie's car was often filled with other people's petrol, which you would siphon with a hose. And you go to Spain, and literally they're doing that thing where
People are
they're
laughing at
sucking on
that.
it.
They don't think you're serious.
No, absolutely. You've just met Robbie, yeah. So they're using this hose pipe method of siphoning to take the sherry from one cask to another, down and down and down, and then each year they take a third out at the bottom. So the casks are never empty. So these are a relative rarity to get your hand on a cask.
There's a lot of unhappy Spaniards,
Like
isn't there?
There are, yeah.
They're wondering where the Solar is going.
Yeah, and we'll gloss over that, Robbie.
We do,
Yeah,
yes.
we will, yeah.
Could we edit that out?
It doesn't work live, does it?
Doesn't work live.
So these, there's still a lovely richness in here, but there's also that kind of fresh fruitiness coming into this particular type of sherry cask. And then, so the recipe here is 35% from first fill European, 15% from the first fill American oak from Spain, and 50% from these refill casks. So again, we're looking for a bit of balance. We're looking for a few different styles in the glass.
Just a wee lament here for the 17-year-old. The 17-year-old was my favourite whiskey from the age of about 25 up until we eventually lost it. So when I heard we were going to replace it with the 18, I think you were the same. We were thinking, what's this whiskey? Because it's got a real hard act to follow. So we were kind of...
We were angry, Robbie.
We were angry.
We were.
Yeah. We drank a lot.
We did.
Yeah, we do when we're angry and when we're happy. And we thought this whiskey's got to be good. So we were kind of anticipating its arrival. And when it did come, well, as you guys will see very soon, it was worth the wait.
Yeah,
That could be a tagline.
it's a great whiskey.
Yeah,
Robbie.
yeah.
And there's a richness and a spiciness in here, which just goes really well with an after-dinner whiskey. This is not a summery lunchtimey whiskey. This is we're thankful we live in Scotland. We're thankful it's cold and rainy. We've got the fire on, and we're going to relax after dinner with this dram. It's a big, rich, spicy whiskey.
Can I come round your house? Sounds great.
Yeah, you're more than welcome. So, what do you think of the nose in this, Robbie? What's it doing for you?
Well, everything that was in the 15-year-old is no longer here. So the first thing, if you've still got some 15-year-old, kind of go back to it, but get that lemony. But when you go to this one, what gets you now is the spiciness. We're now getting a whiskey that's 50% European, American oak. No, American.
50% first fill.
First fill, sherry cask. So it's 50%. So that's the spiciness coming through. You're getting towards the Christmas cake. That's coming in now. It's not full-on Christmas cake, but it's starting to come. And that spiciness gives you the sultanas. It gives you the dark fruits. The green apples, the gooseberries, the green fruit, which was in the 15-year-old, it now turns into ripe red apples. And again, that's what I always picked up in the old 17-year-old. And I'm so happy that we've got it coming through in the 18-year-old, because I enjoy that in my whiskey. To me, this is a whiskey where it's really hitting the ground running. It's a whiskey that's on its best day. It's absolutely amazing whiskey. Glengoyne, round about the late teens, personally, is at an outstanding age. And this is a really good example of that. So I get these spicy notes coming through, as I said, the dark fruits.
And
You've gone on to drinking already.
well, no, I was just thinking that this is we talk about apples a lot with Glengoyne.
Yeah,
but
we
the
do,
10-year-old we're not trying tonight is famously a kind of green appley thing. And
It's like walking through an orchard.
This is more like red apples.
Yeah.
But there's oranges in here, and it's maybe not fresh orange. It's maybe orange marmalade, or it's orange sweets or something. But there's a little kind of slightly rich orangey flavour that I get in this one. I don't get in any other Glengoyne. But.
And you get peppery notes coming through, which comes from the tannins from the oak, from the cask. If you're going to spend 18 years in one of these casks, you're going to take a lot of the influence. So you'll get a wee peppery note coming through in the back there, which is actually quite pleasant. Any more, it maybe just come a wee bit too unpleasant, but it's just at the right balance where you just get nice pepper notes coming through too.
Yeah, it's a fantastic whiskey.
You guys get anything else in there? Dundee cake, yeah. Which again, it's rich, isn't it? Yeah.
And the berries.
The berries come through. It's not sweet, so it's not. You wouldn't say it was. Initially, you get a wee hint of sweetness coming through, but that changes very quickly. So dry notes come through, that peppery notes come through, the spiciness coming through. You know, you're seeing the rich marmalade as well, which is in there too.
Maybe a bit grapefruity as well, if I'm honest.
Which again,
slight bitterness edge to the fruitiness.
That comes from the cask. So any bitterness you will get doesn't come in with that bottle at the top because there's none of that. So the bitterness comes through as the cask matures over the years. And the longer it spends in one of these casks, the more it takes out. You know, it's two ways. You've got absorption and adsorption, so it's a two-way process. The cask removes any of the harsher, unwanted elements of the new mixed spirit. But what it does, it then gives back colour, which is the main thing, or one of the main things, but also gives back the spiciness, the tannins, perhaps what was in the cask before. So if you've had some Oloroso sherry in there, it gives back notes of that too, starts coming through. And then if you get it just right, and you just pick the right age for it, you will end up with something that's as good as the 18-year-old Glengoyne here. Anybody else get any more flavours come through? We've had black treacle. So you're getting like the burnt sugars. Burnt brown sugars. Yeah. Yeah. And that's again, that's coming from the sherry side of things. Those really rich burnt sugars coming through. Good nose, good mouth. Vanilla, all right, yeah. So you're getting vanilla coming through. Yes, all these things. I mean, as you drink it, and then even as you maybe wait a minute, even after a minute, it's still there. It's got a really long after flavour. The 15's lovely, but it hasn't got the legs, if you like, which keep going as long as the 18. But it's been there a long time. It's 18 years in the cask in these very expensive casks, because these casks, you're looking at about £1,000 each for one of these big casks that you can see over in the corner. So that's the type of cask that this whiskey spent 50% of this whiskey spent at least 18 years in. So they're about £1,000. So they have a big influence. And again, but it's all part of what we do. It's the way we produce our whiskey. We make sure we get it right in the distillery, but we make sure we get it right here, every step of the way. It's a long and winding road.
It is, and there's a phrase in the world of white spirits production that says, "When it's cold enough, it's old enough." And with us, we're £1,000 for a cask, and Robbie has to actually employ someone to fall asleep beside that cask for 18 years, and that's a lot of wages, you know.
Yeah.
But when you think about the length of time, and actually, as we're probably going to talk a little bit more about how we source the cask and what process it goes through with a 21-year-old. And as we do that, you'll see that actually it's not 18 years and it's not 21 years. The process starts 6 years earlier in terms of getting the cask prepared in Spain before it even comes to Scotland. So we're working with long time frames. But
we're even planting oak trees now, ready for 100 years' time. And that's how far ahead you got to work. You got to plant ready for the casks for our great grandchildren to drink. That's how long the process takes. As you're saying, it's the white spirits is much different. It's 120, 130 years. You've got to be thinking ahead.
Are you planting any of those trees in Scotland and the UK, or is that?
Well, Scottish oak is different from Spanish oak. Spanish oak, it has the flavours that we're looking for. Scottish oak, it tends to have more, it's more knotty, it grows wilder, whereas the European oak, it grows straight up. So you can get maybe 2 or 3 casks out of a Spanish oak. There's too much tannins. We did try Scottish oak about 10 years ago as a finish, just as a finish. We got some 15-year-old Glengoyne and we put it in, I can't remember, it was about 15 casks we had. And the influence from the oakiness from those Scottish oak casks, it came through so fast. And it got to the point we did get worried a wee bit that it kind of enveloped everything else until it kind of settled down. So we actually think Scottish oak as a concept would be good. I think it's just probably got too much you wouldn't be able to spend 15 years in there. Wouldn't. And it's quite porous as well. It is quite porous compared to the bourbon, the American oak, and the European oak.
The other thing is that 75% of all oak trees in Scotland were chopped down around about 1800 in the wars against Napoleon, and the other 25% were used to build the Scottish Parliament. So there's not a lot of trees out there in Scotland. Both very worthy causes, but there's nothing more worthy than a great dram of whiskey, and if they'd left some of them out, it'd been a bit better, Robbie.
I mean, imagine wasting oak on furniture. Oh, yes.
They did the wrong thing.
They did the wrong thing, yeah.
So I think now could very well be the time to move on to the Glengoyne 21-year-old. And although we talked about balance and about 15-year-old and about the 18-year-old, the 21-year-old is something quite special. We know that from the feedback we get. We know it from the fact that an awful lot of people are willing to pay a small three-figure sum to secure a bottle of it, and we know it from the awards it wins. And the reason it's special is quite simply, excuse me, Robbie, I'll go around here and get a new unbroken reed pointer, which I'll look after this time.
I was not allowed to use the pointers.
No.
No. Even in rehearsal, I wasn't allowed to use the pointers.
No, and then I broke it.
Then you broke it. Carry on.
You finished. So, European oak sherry casks. So, look at the colour here. Look at the evaporation. So, if you want to talk inefficiencies, use a European oak sherry cask. Much more porous than a white oak. Literally, there are more holes in the cask for the spirit to escape out of, and therefore the level here will not be quite as low as the level round here. So very porous, hugely expensive, really awkward process to go through, and yet it's worth it. And the history with us and sherry casks is that in the 1860s, Glengoyne was purchased from the original farmer called George Connell that started the distillery up legally in 1833. 35 years later, the Lang brothers bought the distillery. The Lang brothers were a very interesting family from the west end of Glasgow that were spirit merchants, and their business was based in the basement of a church in Highland in Glasgow. So they imported a lot of sherry, and they thought, well, we've got all these empty casks. Why don't we buy a distillery and stick some whiskey in it? And literally that's how that started off. But the casks, we've talked about how sherry itself is matured in American oak. So the European oak comes in for the Spanish guys back in the 19th century purely as transportation casks. It's too raw, it's too spicy, it's too rich for the more sort of dainty sherry flavours. But what you can do is you can create casks like that you're not going to use the expensively imported American oak. You're going to use your local oak trees. You're going to ship it by sea to Bristol, by train to London, in most cases, and then the sherry would be put in bottles in London and sent around the old British Empire, as it were. So London became the hub of sherry bottling. A lot of the sherry companies were owned by English families, and there was a big supply of empty transportation casks. They're not going to send them back to Spain, so the Scots would go down and buy these really cheaply, or if you turned up at night, they were often free of charge. And I think even the Scotsmen in the audience will agree that as Scots, anything that's free is a very good thing. So they started becoming used quite widely. But then when you go back to 10 years later and you see something like this coming out, all of a sudden it's wow, it's a bit of a game changer for the industry. And so things progressed for a few decades quite nicely. It was still bottled in London or in Glasgow by the Lang brothers or whatever. It just wasn't bottled in Spain. As we go into the 20th century, things started to change. And as we go through the 20th century, a law comes into force. If you're going to be a sherry producer, you not only have to use a Solera system and do the fractional blending and use the right grapes, you've also got to bottle it in Spain. So no more transportation casks. And if you talk about another game changer, well, that's it, because we've all become hooked in these flavours, and all of a sudden the transportation casks ain't coming over the water anymore. So what do? Well, you've only really got one option. You go back to casks that you don't think are quite as special, or you go and speak to a friendly cooperage down in Jerez, and you say, here's a proposition for you. We're from Scotland. We want you to chop down that tree. We want you to build a cask. And they say instantly, no. We've got to legally use American oak to make the sherry. And it's got to go through a fractional blending. And once we fill it with sherry, it will remain full, and you can't get the cask, you silly Scottish man. And we said, no, you're not understanding properly. What we're planning on doing is asking you to season the cask for us. So you fill it with the sherry wine, And after about 2.5 years, once it's really soaked in there, we want you to tip that wine out. And they say, well, hang on a minute, but we can't call it sherry. And we say, well, we're not really that bothered about that. What we want is we do what you want with the sherry. And what they did, incidentally, was then distill it and turn it into Spanish brandy, which gives them a free of charge basis for their spirit, which they suddenly thought, okay, we can go with this is good. The crazy Scottish guys want to do that, we'll kind of run with it. So from halfway through the last century, everyone that's been using European oak sherry casks has had to go there and actually manage the process. Use trees that are only chopped down for us, pick grapes that are only going to be used to season our cask. It takes 3 years to dry the wood in the sun before you even build the cask. It takes another 2.5 years for it to be properly soaked into the wood in the way that we want. And then you tip it out and make your Spanish brandy. We're quite happy with that. Send these casks to us, and then we'll fill them with the Glengoyne. Because if you don't go through that process, we have lost a huge part of the flavour that from that 50 years or so, from the mid to late 1800s to the sort of early to mid 1900s, we grew so used to that flavour and we loved it so much that we had no choice but to go and replicate that. And Robbie, to this day, along with his boss, goes and spends a bit of time down in Jerez managing that process for us. And we've worked with the same family called the Tavasa cooperage, run by a great gentleman called Narciso, who Robbie knows very well. And they are literally doing this process just for us, not for the sherry industry.
This is very rare. I mean, what Stuart's talking about there, isn't every distillery in Scotland are doing that. I mean, I worked at 12 distilleries before I came to Glengoyne, and none of those whiskey distilleries filled these casks that Stuart's just described. They just didn't do it because of they never put their horse onto that carriage, whereas Glengoyne has always had that horse and that carriage together. It's what we've done for generations before that. We've always done that, and that's what we're always going to do. All the other distilleries I've worked at was mainly American oak, but Glengoyne, Ian MacLeod distillers want to continue what we've always done. So we do this very expensive process. We go out to Spain once a year, myself and Gordon, just to look at these casks. We actually have to count the casks as well, and every now and then they'll take out a sample just to make sure the right quality of sherry has gone into those casks, and we put the bung back in, and then they'll be there with them for 2 years before it comes across over to us at Glengoyne. Then we eventually fill them. So yeah, it's a very laborious, as you say, it's a laborious process. It's time consuming, it's very, very expensive, but it's necessary. You
can guarantee that the cask has been well made by a cooper you know, and filled with grapes picked by a bloke you know, and in the bodega maturing under the right sort of supervision. You can do it another way, and that's to use brokers. And you can go out there and say, look, I need X amount of sherry casks next year. You can speak to 5 or 6 different brokers, and you'll get a mixed bag of casks coming your way. And not only are you endangering the end flavour 2 and a bit decades later, but your cask might start leaking in the warehouse. It's not well made, and so by doing it with the people you know and using another family company, and obviously ourselves, we are a family company too, and there's that nice kind of link together. But you get
providence, isn't it? You know where it's come from.
If a cask leaks, which I think very, very rarely happens, you can pick up the phone and speak to the guy in Spain that's made it. And we know all the coopers over there type of thing. So it is just, it's hugely expensive, but what you get from doing that, and if you add a bit of patience, as in 2 and a bit decades, sitting waiting for it to kind of happen, and then you open up that cask and you put it in this bottle and then you taste that, you get something that's really, really, really quite special. And there's not, for me, and I'm clearly a little bit biased having been here a couple of decades or so, I'm also realistic in terms of there are an awful lot of great whiskies in Scotland. And we're both whiskey fans, and we drink whiskies from all over Scotland, and there are dozens of great ones that you should all try. But this, for me, is up there amongst the very best. I love our 20.
No, absolutely, yeah. And when you put your nose in this, I mean, we got a nice blast from the 18, but when you go into the 21, that sherry is just huge. It is Christmas. It's Christmas cake. It's that spiciness coming through. Oh, it's the red apples are.
Yeah.
I mean, they're there. Just so many different smells coming through to the nose.
It's dried fruits now and not fresh fruits.
It's not fresh, yeah.
It's raisins and sultanas. The Christmas cakes are good.
Yeah.
a good way of looking at it, actually. There's a bit of cinnamon in there, especially when you taste it. You get a little nip at the end of a kind of richy cinnamon that comes from the oak, and a little bit of honey in there, a little bit of sweetness. It's just aromatic. It's a great whiskey.
I mean, I know people used to maybe drink expensive brandies after expensive meals, but now they will drink the 21-year-old because that's how they associate this whiskey. It's up there with the very expensive cognacs.
And we talked earlier about the legs and how that works. With this one, you're going to see a little bit more in terms of the way it interacts with the glass. They're sticking there. They're just starting to run down now. There's a richness, there's an oiliness in there, Robbie. These are, all three whiskies we're trying tonight are 43%, so there's no change in the alcohol volume to account for that. It's just the richness and the spiciness it's picking up from the oak and from that 2 decades plus in the warehouses. Great whiskey.
And then when you drink it, it's soft, isn't it? It's soft. You get the sherries coming through. You do get the tannins coming through from the oakiness, which you will. I mean, you're always going to get tannins from a European Oloroso cask. 21 years. It's 100%. There's nothing else. It's just that's this whiskey spent all of its life in one type of cask. So you're going to get these tannins coming through, but they don't grab you by the throat. They're gentle. They're soft. They release flavors. You get that peppery note that came through the 18. It's again, it's subtle. I mean, it's so well balanced, and that's something that's really quite difficult to do. That's something that the blender, John, he's got to work that out, just bringing all these casks together and just making sure the flavors are balanced, because some of them will be quite big, and some of them will be quite subtle. So it's just getting them together, marrying them off, letting them spend time together, and then you put them in the bottle, and this is eventually what you end up with. And it is absolutely superb whiskey. This is, again, if you're going to a sherry whiskey, this is what you'd be looking for. If you love sherry, that's the whiskey. What are you guys getting from this? A lot of feedback with these two. What about this one?
I think it's quite a lot of fennel on it.
Pepper note.
Spice,
Yep. Yeah, so it's the spiciness that's coming through for you. So again, so you're getting that dark sugar, almost like the burnt sugar coming through, almost what you put around a toffee apple. You know, you dip that, so that's that really rich sugar coming through. Again, Christmas cake. All these things are in Christmas cakes, and that's, you know, if you're baking a Christmas cake this year, if you've put some of that in, I wouldn't bother. I would just drink it. To be honest with you, I wouldn't waste on a cake. No, bake a cake and just drink the whiskey. Yeah. But it is, isn't it? It's such a lovely, well-developed whiskey, and it's been there for 21 years. This is something that was distilled, back in 1995, 96. It's been a long time, just waiting for this moment.
That's a good point, in that it'll be 96, it could be 95, it could be 94. So with all these, the youngest whiskey in there dictates what age you're going to put in. But some of that is about, you would overage it for flavour reasons, just to add something a little bit more into it, or you would maybe overage it occasionally for stock reasons, because Glengoyne's a distillery which has never overproduced. And if you are a distillery that overproduced and you come to a downturn, then your distillery gets mothballed, and because you've got enough stock in the warehouses already, and then your workforce goes away, and your continuity goes away, and your skills go away. So Glengoyne's always chosen quite a prudent path through the kind of highs and lows and the natural dips and falls of the kind of whiskey economy, if you like. So, and that's great for the health of the distillery, but it means that we're not a distillery that has an abundance of casks at every single age. For example, we will be having a Glengoyne 30-year-old this year, but last year and the year before we couldn't have produced that because we don't have the right stock at 30-year-old. It is going to be really worth waiting for, because the reason that we've hung on is because we had great stock at 28 and 29-year-old, which is having its 30th birthday, and hence the reason you wait 2 years and you do it really well, rather than saying, well, our 28-year-old's just kind of okay, or our 30-year-old at times just kind of okay. So the stock profile is really important, and so sometimes you can end up with some older whiskies in it, but the minimum age will be 21.
Very early. I mean, a number of years ago, about 4 years ago, the industry was going alpha leather. It was making whiskey like there was no tomorrow, and there was a temptation for Glengoyne to follow the same route, just to turn the tap on because there's a huge demand for single malt whiskey. But we didn't. We knew we couldn't because we couldn't get our hands on enough of these casks or the bourbon casks. So we weren't just going to be cynical and turn on the tap as fast as we can go and produce as much Glengoyne as we possibly could over 365 days. And where we're going to put, we'll just put it into any old wood we can find. And in 10 years' time, we'll hope, fingers crossed, that'll be Glengoyne. We didn't. We just took it. We just stayed where we were. We didn't take a step forward. We just stayed where we were, and we've kept the production level at the same. The first thing you ask yourself is, do we have the casks available to satisfy the actual production level? If the answer is yes, we produce to that amount of casks. If the answer is no, then we'll lease it back. We'll only produce whiskey to the amount of available casks to make sure that these are always available at this quality. Because no point in getting that right if you're not going to get this right. No point, absolutely no point. You're wasting your time. Just stay in bed.
And Stephen kicked the night off by saying that we're a distillery that measures progress in centuries, let alone decades or years. And I think that's true. It's tempting sometimes to cash in when the demand's there. But if you do that, then it's the reputation's at stake. So it's always about waiting until the stock's perfect before you release it. And
absolutely.
Robbie, although you're a Glengoyne legend, pretty soon, about 50 or 100 years will pass and no one will remember you. But they will remember you if you do something bad right now. So all you've got to do is, you're captain of that ship and you've just got to keep it sailing in the right direction.
That's the plan.
That's the
Great
plan.
job, guys. You really brought that alive for us. We've got about 15 minutes left on this event, so we want to throw it open to you wherever you are in the world. Any questions you've got for Robbie or for Stuart, you can post them on Facebook or you can tweet us at Glengoyne as well. And we've got our specially invited audience here of bloggers and competition winners as well. And if Stuart needs any extra pointers, he pretends he doesn't have any. Mark on camera there, show the good people at home. He's got a supply in the corner here, just readily available for all these occasions here. So we might need one of those. So who wants to kick us off with a question for Robbie or Stuart in the room here tonight? Who'd like to be first? This lady, just hang on a sec. Here we go.
Hi there. I was just wondering, in terms of the new make spirit, what is it you're looking for and how do you make sure you get that time and time again?
That's a really good question. We've got a nosing panel. So there's 4 of us at Glengoyne, so not just myself. There's myself, there's Duncan, there's Ewan, and there's Steph. So every time we produce spirit, before we put it into a cask, it looks like this. It just looks like a glass of water. But we actually do assess the quality of it. So it goes in front of the nosing panel, and each one of them just looks at it, and they actually score it, and they'll say what they find in it. And they generally come up with the fruity comments. Another nose that they look for is new make leather. So if you bought a new leather jacket and smell it, it's a lovely smell, that comes out. So that's one of the flavors we're looking for. And the way we get these flavors, green apples is another one. So you've got 2 or 3 things. We've got to get these every time we produce it, because that will eventually give us these. And the way we do that is, it's from the very start of the process to the end, we're nursing it through. But those flavors come at the very end of the process in the distillation. It's the way we operate our stills. And we've got the slowest distillation in Scotland. It's monotonously slow. It sounds like him having a pee at 4 o'clock in the morning, after a night out.
What an image that is.
That's not an image, And how I know that, I don't want to say how I know that. But we do it so slow. And the way we do it slow is so we don't drive the heat in the stills and force all the heavier flavors, because you've got flavors at different weights in the distillation process. And we want flavors which are the lighter. So we're only pushing so high so the heavier ones stay down and the lighter ones are the ones that are rising up. And they rise up slowly so they have more contact with the actual copper stills. And there's an exchange where the copper removes sulfur, which comes from the actual fermentation. But it also adds something. It also adds some flavors as well. So it's like interaction, same way the casks do. So if you just push the actual distillate up gently and don't force it up the way some distilleries do that, because that's what they're looking for. Yeah. It's not a bad thing for them. It's just not for us. And that's our bottleneck. That's why we're 25% inefficient, because we've got to get that green apple. We've got to get that new leather. We've got to get that fruity coming through. And the only way we can do it at Glengoyne is by nursing the distillate and pushing it gently over. And if you do that every day from 1833 to now, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And that's what we're going for.
Good question, great answer. I'm guessing the next question from everyone here is, how do you get a job on the nosing panel?
First of all, you need a nose. That's right. And you've got to pass the test. That's the problem. Passing the test is quite
tricky.
There's a few hurdles to get through.
Good fun rehearsing for the test, though, wouldn't it?
Stuart's on the mature panel, for this whiskey. So Stuart's got a good nose for the mature side of it. So, and I'm actually on the mature as well. So
you're a mature and mature.
I'm immature. I'm mature. Depends what day you find me. Yeah.
Right, let's jump onto the internet for the next question. Jill in the Czech Republic. Hi, Jill. Good evening to you. Will Robbie be doing more of his Robbie's Choice? Or Robbie's Choice?
Yeah, that goes back to the Ruby Port.
Yeah.
That'd be the Ruby Port from when? 2007.
You're probably right.
It was 2000. That was about 10 years ago.
Good memory, Jill.
That's ago. I remember it. It was lovely. And that was a whiskey that was distilled about 20 years earlier. So yeah, Jill's got a good memory. That was a very rare whiskey. I mean, that whiskey's long gone. It was a single cask, so we could never reproduce that. But you're asking, will I be doing another choice sometime in the future? It's something we have talked about.
I think let's not rule that out.
Let's not rule that. And there was also the production team had their choice as well. So I would like that. It was very successful, and these whiskies won a lot of awards.
Call
as well.
it Jill's Choice. How about that?
Jill's Choice. Yes, you can come up with select casks.
All right, we said it now. It's going to happen. Good. Okay, next question in the room here. Just at the back there. Yeah.
How interesting has it been introducing bourbon casks to your range? I mean, has it been quite challenging, or has it been quite seamless?
Do you want to answer that one? Or?
I think it's been a huge benefit. We wouldn't have our 12 and 15 tasting the way they do without it. It was a big decision, and actually if you go back to beyond a few years ago, we weren't filling bourbon casks at Glengoyne for ourselves. However, the way that distilleries work and the way that the industry works is that we're always trading and swapping casks with each other. If you all have distilleries, you can interact with us and say, I'll swap a parcel of my cask for your casks. And if I do it with all 18 people in the room, I can take 18 different single malt casks and I can get some grain whiskey and I can make myself a blend. And that's the bedrock of the industry, and it's still 90% of the sales worldwide. You guys are all interested in single malt, and we love drinking single malt.
We do.
The blends are huge, and there's some wonderful blends there. And so there's a continual sort of trading that goes on. And one of the really good old companies in the industry let us have a sample of a 15-year-old bourbon cask, and it all went through your Bros Gordon. And we tried that, and we'd filled it for them. So 15 years before, the whiskey would have left in casks that they chose, and they've had them in their warehouses for all 15 years. And we'd never really filled bourbon casks. And we tried it, and we thought, do you know what? I know we're all about sherry, and I know the story is all about sherry, but there's something pretty wonderful about that. And we bought a parcel back or swapped for something else, or however it worked, and we used whiskey that we'd originally filled for a direct competitor in Scotland, and that was the basis for doing the first 12 and 15-year-old. And of course, when we realised how good it was, we started filling a particular portion each year. And there was some people within our company that said, well, we're known for first fill sherry casks. And the overwhelming argument was, when we tried to create, we created the 12-year-old first, followed by the 15-year-old a week or two later. And when you taste it, and you taste the freshness that comes in, and that ripe, fresh, fruity zestiness that it brings to the kind of equation, we thought, well, shouldn't we be about producing a great range of Glengoyne, all of which tastes a little bit different? And shouldn't the real be-all and end-all be the quality of what's inside the bottle? So forget about us being hung up on this sherry story that we've had since 18, whatever it was, and we're only starting filling bourbon now. Does it give us a great tasting whiskey? Yes. Okay, let's do it.
Yes,
and I think that's what kind of won the day. Mm-hmm. And I think we made a great decision there. Mm-hmm. It just brings something else into our range that I know we both really love.
Great, thanks, Stuart. Remember, if you're loving the chat here tonight, you can win a bottle of your favourite expression here just by voting for which is your favourite. You can do it via the Facebook link, and you can do it on Twitter as well. And we keep that open until midday on Monday. Let's go back to the internet. Mark in the Netherlands. Come on, everyone. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Mark.
Controversial. What do you guys think of no-age whiskies? Here we go.
Another one for you, Stuart.
Oh, thank you, Robbie. It's a hot potato catch. This is the background to this would obviously be that a lot of people are producing whiskies without that age written on the bottle. And there can be a couple of reasons for doing it. Sometimes it might be because you maybe don't have enough stock available. But there's a genuinely other good reason for doing it. And in our range, we have a cask strength. And when we released the cask strength at first, it was called the Glengoyne 12-year-old cask strength. And we sold it alongside the Glengoyne 12-year-old at the 43%. And there was some confusion there, and actually, this wasn't about having whether we had the right age of stock or not. We said, well, what about if we make the cask strength the be-all and end-all of that? This is a whiskey that for us isn't about age.
It's about quality.
It's about
having the best casks available.
Yeah,
that's what it's about. You know, it's not. Some people think of being a wee bit cynical. Perhaps you're taking away an age statement, but no, it's you want to make sure what you're putting in there is the best cask you've got available, rather than just putting yourself to that one spot all the time. Sometimes you might have something that's maybe a year or two younger than that, or it might be a year or two older than that. So rather than just changing the labels all the time, you think we're always going to make sure that whatever's in that whiskey is always going to be a very high quality, and it's ready at that point to go into it.
Yeah, and cask strength is also, we know which batch of cask strength we're on. So that we actually, if we put an age in the label, we'd have to reprint the labels every time because it changes every time. And it's done purely on flavour. Mm-hmm. And it's just, there's something really good about young whiskey. It's a bit like, it's quite invigorating. And at cask strength, it seems to work well at full strength. In the same way that for me, it works well with a really smoky Islay whiskey. There's been some great young Islay smoky whiskies. There's something about the big richness of a cask strength bottling, particularly when you're bringing sherry casks into it, that just kind of works at a very young age. And we don't claim it's old. We're quite, you know, we'll tell you it is the youngest of our range. There's whiskey in there that's under 10 years old. It might have been 9-year-old last time and 8-year-old the time before that, and that changes. And when it changes each time, it's about John Glass saying, how am I going to get some that's got a big, rich sherry impact that's nice and oaky, that sends a shiver down your spine as you drink it and makes you kind of, you know, look at life in a slightly different way. And we have 8 or 9 whiskies in our range, depending whether we're bringing in this 30-year-old, and in a couple of years' time we'll have a 50-year-old. And one of them doesn't have an age statement on it. And I'm kind of all for that. It's just a different way of looking at it. I think if our whole range had no age statement on it, I'd feel differently, to be honest with you. But it's 1 out of 8 or 9. And for us, it's about the strength, it's about the boldness, and it's about the casks. And that one is the one that we say it's not so much about age.
Mark, thanks for your question. Come and see us at Glengoyne sometime soon. We're just about out of time in our hour. I can't believe how quickly it's gone. So let's do one more question in the room here. Who's going to be right down the front here?
Hi. When you sit down to have your Glengoyne, what food do you have with your Glengoyne? What would you choose, the one thing to accompany your dram of whiskey?
I remember it was a wee Japanese lady came to visit the distillery a number of years ago, and she was talking about the 10-year-old Glengoyne, and it's absolutely fantastic with sushi. And she's got a sushi restaurant out in Japan, and she serves 10-year-old Glengoyne with sushi. Now, I love sushi, and I love 10-year-old Glengoyne, so I thought, well, that could be worth a look at, and it was absolutely amazing. Not that I'm eating sushi every night and drinking 10-year-old Glengoyne, but it actually worked really well. But then again, you get the 21-year-old, and you have that as a dessert whiskey, you know, so you get some kind of rich pudding and drink the 21-year-old. That's good as well. We have done dinners with whiskies where you kind of where you match the starter, and you try and get the whiskey to go with it. And we've had venison with, was that the 18-year-old with venison? Red meats?
Anything gamey goes really well with the 18-year-old. We've done a lot of kind of work. It's a tough gig that we've got here. We get the finest chefs in Scotland to create a range of different foods.
And we eat chocolates with the whiskey.
And we've tried them with chocolates. And with wonderful with cheese. Cheese and chocolate are your two easy go-to matches. With a heavily sherry influenced whiskey like our 21-year-old, and some soft blue cheese. Yeah, I mean, you really can't go wrong. It's fantastic. But we work with we've got a couple of chefs, Justin and Tom, that we work with really closely, that we do a lot with, and some of the things that they do just adds something to it. So I mean, I love our 15-year-old, but I could sip that, and then Justin or Tom will say, "Now try it with that." And you have a bit of that in your mouth, and then you drink a bit of this, and actually it just adds something to it. It just opens it up. And I think round the world, Scotland's pretty slow at catching on to the fact that whiskey and food can gang together pretty well. You know, they're way ahead of us in France with cognac, let alone wine all around the world. And This is our national drink. Scottish food has has improved so much over the last couple of decades. There's wonderful chefs. There's the best ingredients in the world running about our hills and swimming about our lochs. And why not drink it with whiskey? And what could possibly go wrong? Even if it's not the perfect match, if you get a great plate of food, some great whiskey. I mean, if 7 out of 8 meals that you have with alcohol and the alcohol is wine, fair enough, we'll give you that. But just once in every while, get your favourite whiskey out and just see what works. And you'll actually discover, and it's recent years for us that we've been doing this, but there's an amazing bunch of flavours that just match perfectly out there, and it's just trial and error, and it's bloody enjoyable trial and error as well, so go for it.
At home, if you stay on the Glengoyne website and have a look at the Kindred Spirits pages, there's more information and some great videos about that, and some partners that we've worked with too. Well, we've spoken nicely to Steve Zuckerberg, and he says we can have Mark Zuckerberg, 2 more minutes, I think, on this evening. Steve, on Twitter, it is, saying, how can you improve your nose and your tasting skills? So if you want to be in part of that nosing panel, how do you actually do that? How can you work on it?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. It's one of these things that some people have good noses and some people just don't have good noses, good sense of smell.
So it's like a palate.
It's like a palate. Yeah, I would say just get whiskies and just look at the tasting notes and just nose it. Take your time, nose it, rather than just drinking it quick. But put your nose in there and just refer to the notes. Perhaps you don't agree. Perhaps your notes are something slightly different. Whereas we may be getting green apples, you might be getting, as this lady did, she got gooseberries. And it's whatever your nose tells you. We can't tell you if your nose is right or wrong. So by just trial and error, just smell everything. If you go around, just maybe not everything, but honestly, if you smell, just keep smelling everything, and that develops your nose. Just trial and error. Just go around breathing in, and it's just using your senses, and that will actually develop them, and you will then get an appreciation, or more of an appreciation, for these fine whiskies that we've got.
It's something that's part nature and part nurture. No matter, you're either born with a particularly sensitive olfactory gland, or you're not. But no matter how good you are when you start out, absolutely everyone improves with practice. Mm-hmm. And we're lucky enough that people actually pay us to hang around sniffing and drinking whiskey. And that helps. I'll never have a great nose, but it's better than it was when I first started doing it. Mm-hmm. I can only maybe take it so far. But the hardest thing's putting what's in your head into words. And often someone standing beside you says something, you think, I've been trying to get that out of there and out my mouth for the last 10 minutes. That's exactly what it is. And that's the thing for me that becomes easier the more you do it. Mm-hmm. It's to translate it into words.
Keep going.
And however good or bad you are, you'll definitely get better the more you do it.
Stuart, Robbie, have you had any medical training, you guys, at any point? Because you might need it for this next one. John on Facebook's asking, what is it in the 10-year-old that makes my feet tingle?
Maybe he's putting his feet in the 10-year-old. I don't.
Works for grapes, but not for whiskey.
Try drinking it. Yeah.
I've not experienced the tingling feet, but I think John sounds like a good guy to go out for a night out with, and we can. I've had the numb feet before, Robbie.
Yes.
But not the tingling on the way to being numb.
Yeah. What is it in the tingle that makes my feet tingle? I have no idea, John, but keep going for it because it sounds great.
John, I think you should come and visit us here at Glengoyne. We'll try and do a more in-depth diagnosis. We'll take one more question from in the room here tonight. Who'd it like to be, just to finish things off for us? Gentleman just over there.
Where is the market for whiskies coming from? With Brexit and everything going along at the moment, has it opened up a new field for you?
Well, yeah, Brexit hasn't done us any harm so far. But we're not really into Brexit yet anyway. I mean, what Brexit has done is made the pound go like this compared to all the foreign currencies. So, whiskey's become quite cheap if you're living everywhere else in the world. So it's done us this doesn't no harm there. I mean, we're getting a lot of visitors coming through to the distillery as well, which, we're getting 80,000 people coming through the door this year, which is tremendous. Sales of Glengoyne and Ian MacLeod's other products are all doing very well. The marketplace is everywhere in the world. I mean, Glengoyne is in how many different countries?
70.
Is it 70? So globally, we're into 70 countries. You've got your big markets such as America, but you've got Europe, Germany, the Scandinavian countries. It's pretty much everywhere. Far East. We're scattered all over. So Brexit might affect the European countries, but the rest of the world, not so much. It's so far, so good. We're doing okay out of it. We're doing well.
I mean, the Brexit thing and the strength of the pound has helped any exporter. But there's a kind of bigger issue, which is that if you go back, we talked about the peaks and troughs of the market, and just like any market, it rises and falls, and you could chart the opening and closing of distilleries for the last 200 years, and you'll quickly see, well, there was prohibition there was wars there, but there's financial constraints there, and there was boom times in the 70s, and it got tougher in the 80s.
Dropped.
And it just goes like a sine wave up and down. But until quite recently, there was only certain markets for whiskey, the historical traditional ones. You've got the UK, you've got Europe, you've got North America. In the east, it would have been Japan, obviously, everyone knows, a traditional whiskey market. Well, those days are now behind us. There's just countries all around the world with this huge thirst for what is generally seen as the kind of finest and most prestigious spirit in the world, which has to be produced in our case in a very small country. And so, although we still might go like this, we're at a much higher base because the countries, the interests around the world, you wouldn't believe how much Glengoyne we sell in places like Taiwan or in places like Australia is now a huge single malt market. It's one of our top countries. South Africa is a top 10 global single malt market. So it's these historical countries. I mean, America, the single malt sales in America are through the roof at the moment. America's always been there for our industry. It's these new people that are coming in, whether it's in Brazil or whether it's in Russia or whether it's in China. India's monumentally big for whiskey. They drink more whiskey in India, including Indian-made whiskey, than the rest of the world drinks Scotch whiskey. All our global sales, all our exports combined, don't even cover the whiskey that's drunk within the Indian borders. And the things that are holding it back are tariffs and the economy. But as we see people becoming richer and richer in countries like India, the demand's absolutely massive, and it's new demand. So although we'll still be an industry that comes and goes, and Brexit might be one of these things in a few years' time, I don't know, that maybe helps us do that, we're still operating at a much higher level than we were when it was more confined to traditional kind of markets. So there's a global thirst for it, which although times might get tougher and times might get easier, that demand is still, it's just going to be at a higher level than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago.
That's a great way to finish. We couldn't get through all your questions. There's so many still coming in from around the world tonight, but we're going to lock these guys in here with a laptop and 3 bottles tonight, so we will get back to you wherever you are. So keep your questions coming over the course of the next few minutes. And in terms of the competition, remember, vote for your favourite expression that you've seen tasted here tonight and you've heard being tasted, and you could have a chance to win one of those bottles. And we will keep that going until Monday at 12 noon via Facebook and via Twitter as well. Thanks to the guys for a brilliant tutored tasting right around the world on Facebook and with our lovely audience here at Glengoyne here tonight. We pride ourselves at Glengoyne in being a family, don't we? Genuinely. So it's been great to share it with the wider family around the world. I hope you've understood our accents and their accents here this evening. If you haven't signed up for the Glengoyne Family Database, do that now before you go to bed this evening, and explore the rest of the website as well. And raise a glass, everyone here and us as well, to you at home. Thanks very much indeed for joining us from Glengoyne Live. Sláinte.
Sláinte. Thank you. Cheers. Cheers, Robbie. Yep. Stephen.
Very good.
Thank you.